All right. Hey, church family. Good morning. Great to see well, I can't see you, but I'm grateful for all of you who are joining us online today. It's great to see those of you who are in the room. It's hard to believe it's already December. Can you believe it? December 1st today? I hope you had a great Thanksgiving this past week. I took time to give thanks for you. Just so grateful for the church family I get to be a part of. Took time to pray for many of you. Sometimes, I do like many of you, I keep prayer lists, but then there are days where my prayer time with God is, God, bring to my mind those I need to lay before you. And I was thinking specifically about some of you who this may have been your first Thanksgiving or a hard Thanksgiving because someone who may not be with you anymore or somebody who may be gone for a season of life right now. So it was an honor to be able to lift you up before God this past week. I'm just curious how many of you already have Christmas set up in your house. Show of hands. You're ready to roll. Hands down. How many of you are not ready yet? Show of hands. You going to get there? Show of hands. How many of you have at least 5 Christmas trees in your house? Raise your hand with pride, right? I know some of you. That's right. Advent is a word I did not grow up using much in my church upbringing. It is the arrival of something or someone. In our case, it is the arrival and the future arriving of Jesus. So it's a season every year that we think about the arrival of Christ 2,000 years ago, and we also think about the arriving of Jesus that will come when he comes back to make all things right. When I began planning the 52 weeks of 2024, back in probably 2022, began thinking and praying and fasting and dreaming with God about this year, it excited me for us to go through 2024, that we all knew just within an election year there would be a lot of noise out there, that we focused on Christ, and now we get to end by talking about how Jesus stepped into the world 2,000 years ago, and we're invited to have the kind of faith that believes that Jesus is still stepping into our world right now. On December 15th, we're going to have a baptism Sunday. We had one back in April. I reached out to Brittany Wells, who was baptized back in April, and I asked her if she'd be willing to share a testimony of her baptism. And Brittany said, please do not make me stand up on that stage. All right, this is what some of you say too, all right? But she said, I would be glad to write something out to be read. And here's what Brittany wrote out about her decision on April 14th. This was the day we had 7 baptisms on April 14th, which was right after Easter this year. She said, April 14th, 2024, my life changed. Not from the outside looking in, but on the inside, my whole being changed in receiving the Holy Spirit through my baptism. My name is Brittany Wells, and for all my life, I've had a serious case of the oldest girl syndrome. I've always done what I was supposed to and had my head on straight. I knew of Jesus and went to church occasionally growing up, but didn't know Jesus. Honestly, for a long time, I thought that was enough. As I said in my baptism, Jesus was my neighbor who I loved, but I didn't know that I needed to live with Jesus. I still had my share of struggles with anxiety and depression, but I always just moved along and white-knuckled through it. Perfectionism had its claws in deep. And then early spring of 2023, depression and anxiety really started taking over yet again. And I felt it rolling in and had tried all throughout my life, all different ways to fix it. I decided just to start reading the Bible and digging deeper into Jesus. I just knew I had to try something different. Around this time, I also had a friend who was going through some struggles, and she had questions about the Bible. And I knew some stuff just from coming to church, so we started talking through it. Through her questions and my desire to help her, I started really leaning into Jesus and forming a relationship with him. I started moving into his house instead of being his neighbor. Her friendship really helped push me in the direction of Jesus. Since I have moved into the house of the Lord, that depression and anxiety has been almost non-existent. What used to come around every month or so and send me into a fight or flight nightmare has just been a little spat every now and then. Jesus has been my anchor in those times. He has clothed me in his armor for those battles and given me the battle plan. Can we put our hands together and just thank God for what God has done? And if baptism is something you are considering or thinking about, will you find me or one of the leaders or a friend in this church? We'd love to talk with you more about that. I would love to see you this Wednesday night. We're going to eat at 5:30. At 6:30, I'm going to lead our adults in a conversation right here in this room on how to engage the Bible for all it's worth. It's just a time to help equip us for the year 2025 with some commitments in the Bible. But as for today, I want to call us into a time of reflection. Because as the last month of the year hits, I want to invite you to do a couple of things. One, I want to invite you into, for you, I just want to invite you maybe into 3 to 5 minutes a day. For some of you, maybe just 3 to 5 minutes in a week. For you to reflect on the year of how you have seen God at work. How have you felt the grace of God? How have you felt redemption in your life? You're here today, which means God has sustained you with His grace somehow, some way. And there's a practice in our life that needs to be developed about looking back and seeing, okay, God, show me where were you at work, and then maybe write it down and acknowledge it. And I also want to encourage you in the last month of the year to reflect on what does not need to go into a new year with you. Is there a habit in your life or an emotion in your life that you need to spend a month praying about because it needs to stop now? It doesn't need to go into a new year with you. And why not let the Christian calendar in a season like Advent help pace you with God? Tish says this, an author I'm reading, and she wrote a book called Shadow to Light on the season of Advent. She says this season is a recognition of the current state of life here on earth, acknowledging that fraught tension of living between the time of the already of the first advent of God and the not yet of its full redemptive completion. So repeat after me, already, not yet. This half over here, repeat after me, already. This half over here, not yet. Now we're living in the in-between of an already and a not yet. There's already been a defeat of death through what Christ has done. Yet we are not yet living in the fullness of that. There has already been a sacrifice of Christ that has dealt with sin forever. And though we still experience sin in the now, we're not yet there where we're living in eternity with God. There's already a future for us, but we're not yet quite there. There's already a decision God has made that for eternity, pain will be no more. You're not going to have to take Zyrtec anymore. There's going to be no more Flonase. There's going to be no more voices that go out, or coughs that hit us, or arthritis, or cancer. This is our future. It's already been determined, yet we're living in that not yet, where there's still some pain we experience now. But when we experience it now, we can know it's temporary because there's an already that has been determined for us. And this is a season of the year where we're reminded of this already and the not yet. So we're not fully living in the already yet, but you also don't have to fully live just in the not yet, because there is this hope and this faith that there is an already that is on its way to come and meet us now. One author says this: one of the essential paradoxes of Advent is that while we wait for God, we are with God all along. So while we are waiting for Jesus to come and make all things right, we are with God as we wait for the future of God. And this is the beauty and the power of hope. In the Greek, this word hope is this elpido, or elpida, this word. It is to look forward to something with implication of confidence about something coming to pass. So when you think about hope, it is about the future. So you're not hoping for something that's happened in the past. You're hoping for the future. So when you think about the word hope, there is a posture of hope, a trajectory of hope. There is the bent of hope, a direction of hope that is moving us forward. Now, do you want to know the books in the Bible that talk the most about hope? Here are the 3 books in the Bible that talk the most about hope. The first one is Psalms. Psalms is long. It's 150 chapters. It's not the book in the Bible that uses the most words. That's Jeremiah, then Genesis, then Psalms. But Psalms is lengthy. And in the Psalms, you do find these places where people are crying out or writing songs about the God of hope. The third book in the Bible that talks about hope the most is Romans. Some people call it the greatest treatise of the Christian faith that Paul writes. And in Romans, Paul uses hope quite a bit. In Romans chapter 15, verse 13, Paul writes about the God of hope is the one who gives you great joy in your life. It is the verse that is written on my sister's tombstone. Romans 15, verse 13, the God of hope. But the book in the Bible that uses the word hope the most, second most, is the book of Job. And it's a book of great darkness, of pain and loss. Yet somebody who may not have it right now, but is clinging for it and is reaching for it. This hope. Now, hope is not a word that shows up in the birth narratives of Christ. Yet every year, the first week of Advent, all around the world, there are Christians who focus on this word. Now, I'm going to show you a few places that it shows up in the New Testament or in the Gospels, and hope doesn't show up much in the Gospels, but in the Gospels, the first time you see the word hope is Jesus actually quoting from Isaiah chapter 42. In Isaiah chapter 42, what Jesus says is this, and this is in Matthew chapter 12, 20 and 21, as Jesus is quoting from Isaiah 42, but a bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, till he has brought justice through to victory. And in his name the Gentiles will put their hope. The first time you see the word hope in the New Testament is Jesus claiming an Old Testament prophet that hope is coming into the world, and when it does, it's going to be good news for all people, not just one group of people. In John chapter 5, verses 45 through 47, Jesus is saying this, and he's saying this to some of the Jewish leaders. He says, "But do not think I will accuse you before the Father. Your accuser is Moses, on whom your hopes are set. If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But since you do not believe what he wrote, how are you going to believe what I say?" So Jesus is almost like saying to them, what he's saying to them is, look, you're putting your hope in a human, you're putting your hope in a man, when your hope should be in the one who is standing right here in front of you. And in Luke chapter 24, on the road to Emmaus, where you have the resurrected Jesus who's walking with a couple of people who don't know he's the resurrected Jesus. And what you read is this: the chief priests and our rulers handed Jesus over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to restore Israel. Have you ever had those moments in your life like, I had hoped, like we had hoped? We had hoped for a better test result. We had hoped that the result of something would be different. We had hoped. Have you ever had a moment in your life where your hope tank has been depleted? Casey and I and the boys, we had a trip a few years ago in 2019. We traveled out to the West Coast. 17 days in a car as a family. This will either grow you or break you, right? We went to Carlsbad Caverns one night, which if you go to Carlsbad Caverns, you have to wait until stay there long enough for the bats to come out of the cave. Now, when this happens at night, it's not like they release them from a cage. You have to wait on the bats. They decide when they fly. And they come out spinning like in a tornado, and there's always one that goes rogue. Like, it's always one that finds its way into the crowd, lands in the grandma's head, all the kids are scared, you know. And I don't know if this is like the blessing or a punishment of that one bat. Like, is it you were bad this week? You're the one who's going to go fly into grandma's hair. Was it a blessing? Like, there are 1,000 of them. Like, I want to do it tonight, you know. So we waited until all this happened. So it's already dark when we leave. We took a right out of Carlsbad Caverns to go to El Paso for the night. And as we took a right out of Carlsbad Caverns, we passed a sign about 10 miles down the road that said there are no service stations until you get to El Paso. And I looked in the van, and what it said was this: 144 miles to our destination, 140 miles into our van is empty of gas. And I did math, and I quickly knew this is going to be close. And Casey and the boys were already sleeping, and I was like, good for them, because in 2 hours, the three of them may be walking 4 miles. Because I have watched Survivor and Alone and, Running Wild with Bear Grylls, but I don't do this kind of stuff, right? And somebody has to stay back with the van. It probably needs to be me to protect all our stuff. Thankfully, we made it. Everything was fine. But I'm curious for you, at what point when you look at your gas gauge are you like, I should probably get gas sometime soon? Can we just go through a few? Will you go to this first one? Look, I mean, right here for me, I'm not like I got to get to a gas station right now, but it's probably on my mind. When I'm around 3/4 of a tank or half a tank, I may just go to Kroger to get groceries, and I may go over and just go ahead and top it off. Let me just go ahead and get to full. And I'm not going to name any names, but I am married to someone, and I have another son who drives, who take a much different approach when it comes to when they fill up their gas. If you go to the next one, like this, this is for Casey and Truett. Right here, they're like, I've still got 3 days left. I can make it to work and back multiple times. I'm good. For me, it's like, if you get stuck in the third lane on Poplar running out of gas, do not call me, all right? You're on your own. Let Memphis drivers deal with you, all right? And if you go to the next one, at some point, I mean, you're all the way there. Like, it's time. And I guess my question for you today is when it comes to your hope tank, where are you? Like, how depleted are you? Because for the first century followers of God, their hope had been depleted. Almost 400 years that they hadn't had a prophet who spoke in the name of God. And they had the word of God, but 400 years there had seemed to be silence from the Lord. And not only that, they're living in a time where you have Herod the Great and the dynasty of the Herods that were taken over. So you have Herod, who was put over all Judea by the emperor of Rome, and Emperor Augustus is on the record saying, I would rather be one of Herod's dogs than one of his sons. Because Herod would kill anybody. So what you need to know about like the Herods is they didn't have hardly any friends. They were narcissists who cared so much about their name and their brand and who they are and for power. They had no regard for human life at all. Character was not something that they sought after in their life. So with all that said, I want to show you a few places just in Matthew chapter 2 alone where the word Herod, the name Herod, shows up. And if you go to the next slide, I just want you to see in chapter 2, verse 1, in the time of King Herod. Now, I'm just kind of showing you a few sentences from these verses. But as you think about a king, somebody who had power, who only cared about their name, had no regard for human life. And he's the one you read about in Matthew chapter 2, who ends up having babies in Bethlehem under the age of 2, all these boys who were killed, who were like, just do away with them. In verse 3, it says, King Herod heard this, he was frightened. You do not want to frighten a narcissist who has no regard for human life. In verse 7, it's Herod who's secretly called for. So now he's working behind the scenes. In verse 13, Herod's about to search for the child to destroy him. So really what he wants to do at first is just kill Jesus, not all the other babies. He just wants to do away with the threat of the one they say is coming to be king. In verse 16, it's Herod saw that he had been tricked. You do not want to trick somebody who has power and who has no regard for human life and absolutely no character in their life. And right after that is when he sends out the edict to let's just take out all the babies under the age of 2. In verse 19, Herod dies. But in verse 22, one of his sons, who was also a narcissist, who had no regard for human life, ends up having power. So I hear people sometimes these days say things like, it's really hard to be a Christian now. And usually what I think is like every generation has been able to say that. And for 2,000 years ago, to be a follower of God then, who's still trying to hope for a Messiah, this had to be hard for them. Their hope had to be depleted. So then you get these characters of hope. And you have a few of these characters who begin to appear, and I'm just going to kind of paraphrase some of this. But you have Zechariah and Elizabeth. You can read about them in Luke chapter 1. They're old. They don't have any children. He's a priest. He serves the Lord. So even though there was disgrace that had been on them, these are two people who, in some of the language we may use, they kept showing up to church anyway. They kept showing up to prayer meetings. They were a part of the Bible studies. They were pursuing God. They were holding on to hope even when it was hard. Zechariah receives a vision that his wife, in her old age, is going to have a baby. And he's going to be a forerunner for Jesus. He didn't believe it, so he went mute for 9 months. Couldn't talk. Which may have been one of the greatest blessings of Elizabeth's life. That for 9 months, she's making decisions about the baby room, and he has no say in it. She's like, what color would you like to paint? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Oh, wait, you can. All right, so here's what color it's going to be. They kept pursuing God. You have Joseph and Mary. You can read about Mary later on in Luke chapter 1, beginning in verse 36. You can read about Joseph in Matthew chapter 1. Most likely a younger couple, engaged to be married, who find out Mary is going to have a child. They practice self-control. They honor the righteousness of God. They keep pursuing God. In Luke chapter 2, after the birth of Christ, you have Anna and Simeon, two people who they're older in life. They keep showing up at the temple to lead prayer movements and to remind people of the hope of God. And then you have the shepherds and the wise men. In Matthew chapter 2, it's wise men. In the Gospel of Luke, it's shepherds. And you have shepherds and wise men who hear from an angel that a baby had been born, and they go to find the baby. How ridiculous this must have sounded to everyone around them. But what you have is these characters who keep appearing in the birth narrative of Christ, and they were open to a move of God even when their hope tank was running low. They had reason for doubt and even despair, but their hope was in a God that could enter into human history, and a God who would continue to enter. Have you ever noticed before that whenever you drive a new-to-you car, all of a sudden you notice those cars everywhere? Like you may drive off the lot of Landers Ford after hanging out with Brad Bellamy, thinking, I'm the only one who has this color, this brand, this car in all of Shelby County. And before you get home, you've passed like 5 of them. You notice them everywhere. Truett we got him a used Lincoln Town car a year ago. All of a sudden, we notice Lincoln Town cars everywhere. Tish, in her book, From Shadow to Light, she says this: noticing God helps us to keep noticing Him. Then when you take time to reflect on where you have seen God in the past, it prepares you to have eyes open to see God in the future. And these people, these characters, they saw God in the sanctuary, in prayer, through a baby, through angels, in dreams, and they believed that in their world, God might just show up. In our world today, God might just show up. So every year around this time, it happened a couple of weeks ago, I will have friends who send me this message, and you can go to this next image. And I know it's hard for you to see it, but it's a reminder that in Barrow, Alaska, the northernmost point of the United States, that the sun sets on November 18th, and the 6,000 residents in Barrow will not see the sun again until January 22nd. 65 days with no sun. And I shared this story quite a bit. A little over a decade ago, I went up there for about 11 days where I spent time with this community. It was a sermon series I was working on here in this church and a book project I was working on. There was some fascinating insight I received from how you go from darkness to light. Like how you survive seasons of darkness, whether it's because of grief, because of the loss of a loved one, or addiction, whatever it may be. Like, how do we journey from darkness to light? And one of the first people who welcomed me into their community was the principal of the local high school. It's a high school of around 200 students. And she welcomed me into her office, and then she took me on a tour of the town, which took about 5 minutes. We got in her car. She took me to the one grocery store. She drove me by the 3 restaurants. And then she looked at me and said, "Do you want to see the post office?" And I was like, what kind of tour is this, you know? So we went and we pulled into the parking lot of the post office, and she said, "Let me tell you a story." She said she was from the lower 48. And she said there in the high school, 90% of their teachers live in the lower 48. But their public school teachers in Barrow make six figures. And now some of you you're about to Google, like, teaching jobs in Barrow, right? And she said a lot of these people, they live in Charlotte, Los Angeles, but they come up here and they'll teach for like 3 years, and then they'll just go back and live where they're from. And that none of them spend the summer there. They work for 9 months and they leave. And she said here at the post office is where the natives hang out in the summertime. So they just sit out in chairs and have their umbrellas, and that's where they hang out, and they see people coming in and out of the post office. And she said her first 2 summers there, she did the same thing that all the other teachers did. She worked for 9 months, and then she left for 3 months. And when she would go to the post office for 2.5 years, none of the natives would talk to her. And then there was the summer that her and her husband decided to stay and to be a part of the community. So they did. They stayed the entire summer. And when they did, the natives embraced them as their very own. She told me, "Josh, I'm not a person of faith. But one thing we learned is that when you become a part of the community and you enter into their world, they begin to treat you like their own." Which my response was, "You may not claim to be a person of faith, but you just summed up the Christian story. That's what we do. That's what Jesus taught us to do." Jesus showed up and entered into a world, became like the people so that we could become like him. This is our story. This is what we celebrate every December. So a little over a decade ago, I had a friend who came here who was doing some work in Iraq. And I don't know if you remember this, but he stood here on the stage and he showed us a picture. And you can go ahead and go to this picture. And in this picture, he said, "What do you see, the sun setting or the sun rising?" And I remember him saying it's all about perspective. But he said for him to be a person of hope, when you see this picture, especially if you put it up in your house, this always needs to be the sun rising. So for he and his community, they believed that the sun, that the God was bringing a sun into that country that was helping it rise. And you hear about the rise of the church in places all around the Middle East. My encouragement to you in your life as you try to keep your hope tank full, is to surround yourself with hope-filled people. Decrease the time you spend with people in your life who deplete your hope. And reflect with God, who is the giver of hope. Larry Crabb, in a book about broken dreams, says this: "Hope has its own rhythm. We cannot rush it. The water of life will find its way down the mountain to fill the lake from which we can drink. In each of our lives, the harvest is beginning, the sun is rising. The stage is being set, God is moving. The deliverer is eagerly preparing to bless, unable to rest till he does. The Spirit is able to conceive whatever fruit we have long been destined to bear." So hope looks forward. And as we stretch for it, we don't have to pretend to God. We can bring everything we are to God as God continues to fill us with hope. One author says this: "The real Christmas gift for which Advent is the process is learning to hum hope, learning to dance the divine." So I know in the world of performing arts, they often say that the lasting impression is the last impression. And one of the last things we do as a church every Sunday morning in our worship experiences is we go to the table to receive the bread and to receive the cup, to be reminded that Jesus took a step, and for Jesus it was a step worth taking. He stepped into our world taking on our sin, and now invites us to take a step for him. Will you close your eyes and bow your heads? And as you do, just a reminder, there's prayer all around this room for you today. You were invited to the table, not because you were worthy, but because Jesus invites you. And Jesus, in this moment, we give you thanks. And I ask, Jesus, you remind us of the power of hope. That as we receive the bread and the cup, that you will invite us into a moment of reflection with you. God, and for hope tanks that may be depleted in this room, will you begin a process that can begin right now at this table with you to fill that hope tank back up? It can only happen through your power, not through our will or our own strength, but through you. As prayer breaks out around this room, God, we pray that you honor the confession and the honesty. God, and as we step into this last month of the year, may we do it as people who are sustained by your grace, who have hearts that are trying to be grateful and that also want to reflect well. And we do this all in the power of the name of Jesus, and the church said, amen. Welcome to the table this morning.